Hi everyone, I'm Natalie Jones, dietitian. Today I'm going to be speaking about self-monitoring. So self-monitoring people might think of as tracking, they might think of it as using apps, they might think of it as a food diary. Self-monitoring is probably one of the key things when it comes to behaviour change and particularly when it comes to weight loss. What I mean by self-monitoring is being aware of every eating decision, writing down or noting in your app every eating decision that you make. So every time you eat anything, every time you think about eating anything, you write it in your diary and you keep a log of that. What this does is it makes each eating decision really conscious. So if you ask me what I ate yesterday, for example, what I would tend to say is I probably remember my meals. I wouldn't necessarily remember my daughter's fish fingers. I wouldn't necessarily remember that packet of crisps that somebody gave me. I would remember the things that I'd planned to eat. When we think about how important those decisions are, is if we think about what we want to eat and what we plan to eat and then what actually ends up happening, the difference in that awareness really matters. So self-monitoring does two things. It allows you to reflect on what's happened. So I use diaries quite a bit with people, especially when they're not sure why they haven't lost weight. So if it's say they haven't lost weight over a couple of weeks, I'd say, right, keep a food diary, send it to me. It means I can have a look at that and see if there's anything that needs to be changed in terms of portion size or the kind of things they're choosing. But often what happens is when I get people to do that, they lose weight anyway. And that tells us something quite important. It tells us that maybe that person was eating when they didn't mean to be eating or they weren't aware of what they were doing. And the minute they had to write it down, it made a difference in their choices for the rest of the day. So to put it really kind of basically, you know, if you eat one biscuit and you have to write it down, you've written biscuit number 1. You then eat another biscuit, it becomes biscuit number 2. You might think twice about your biscuit number 3. Whereas if it was a plate of biscuits and you weren't really conscious of eating those, it's quite possible that you could have 3, 4, 7. You might not really know until it's actually gone. What it also does is it allows you to reflect on hunger. So when we're keeping food diaries, when we're having to write it down, we then have to think about whether it's worth it. You know, a lot of the time it sticks that little barrier in the place. So maybe dinner's due in a couple of hours, you're a little bit hungry and you think, I'll have something to eat. When you actually write that down, you reflect more on the kind of choice that you're making and also how much you want it. So it's really, really helpful on that awareness of what you're having, but also reflecting on it afterwards. What I often do with people before I see them is I get them to weigh themselves perhaps, and then do a food diary for 2 or 3 weeks, and I make sure that they're writing it down at the time of eating. There is no point of waiting until the end of the day and then trying to remember, because what happens is you often forget, but also you've missed that chance to be conscious of your eating habit as it happens. So you notice it when it's all gone wrong at the end of the day, but you haven't given yourself that opportunity to reflect on it kind of as it's happening. So when people keep food diaries, often it tells them a lot about what they're doing anyway. And I try and get people to keep a food diary in a kind of non-judgmental way. So not to do it in a kind of, not to do it in a way that makes them feel that they shouldn't be having things, but to really just give an idea of what their normal intake's like. And from that we can go from it. A lot of people, when they keep food diaries, suddenly everything becomes perfect all of a sudden. And it doesn't give me a very good idea of what their general lifestyle's like. So self-monitoring, one of the best things you can do and one of the first things you can do when you're thinking about any kind of behaviour change, gives you a really good idea of what your starting point is, makes you very aware of every eating decision, and also allows you to reflect on that as well. And if you're seeing a dietitian or you're seeing another health professional, they can look at that and have some quite useful information to guide their judgment. Thank you.